Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a philosophical showdown, and it's all about something you feel every single second of your life, but probably don't think about much: the very nature of your own personal, subjective experience. I mean, really think about it. That sharp, kind of weird bitterness of your first sip of beer, or, that specific feeling of warmth you get when you see your favorite color. It's not just your brain processing data, is it? There's a feeling to it, a quality. So what exactly is that feeling? And maybe more importantly, how could you ever prove it's even real? Okay, so philosophers have a word for this, and it's qualia. Now, it sounds kind of fancy, but it's a really simple idea. It's just the raw feeling of an experience. The sting of a paper cut, the taste of dark chocolate, the sound of a cello, all of those are qualia. It's, as our source material puts it, simply the way things seem to us. Now, traditionally, these things called qualia are supposed to have four special properties. First, they're intrinsic, meaning the feeling is a property of the experience itself. Second, they're private. I mean, no one else can feel your headache, right? Third, they're ineffable, which is a cool way of saying they're impossible to perfectly describe. I mean, try explaining the taste of a strawberry to someone who's never had one. And finally, they're directly apprehensible. You don't need to figure out you're in pain, you just know it instantly. This all sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? It feels like common sense. Well, this is where philosopher Daniel Dennett steps in. He argues that this whole idea of qualia with these four properties is basically a big illusion. He wants to make us, and I'm quoting him here, uncomfortable when trying to sensibly talk of qualia. So Dennett's attack is very methodical, very logical. He basically takes that traditional four-part definition we just went over, and then he tries to prove that nothing in our minds actually fits that description. And if he can show that no mental state has all four features, well, his conclusion is simple. Qualia, as we define them, just don't exist. So let's jump into the first showdown. Dennett takes aim at that first property, the idea that our experiences are intrinsic. And to do this, he uses a pretty clever example that I think most of us can relate to: acquiring a taste for something. This quote really gets to the heart of it. Think back to that first taste of beer. For a lot of people, it's not great. But over time, they start to enjoy it. Dennett's whole point is, if the quality of the experience itself can change that much, how can it be an intrinsic, unchangeable property? You don't suddenly start enjoying that initial awful taste. Your whole relationship to the taste changes. And this lays out the debate perfectly. On one hand, you have Dennett saying the experience is relational. It depends on your attitude, your memories, all these external factors. But the defense, from our source paper, completely flips this. They say, wait a minute, the very fact that your experience changes proves it's tied to your internal processes. The qualia belongs to you and your mental state at that moment. All right, let's move on to the second showdown. This time, Dennett goes after something that feels even more fundamental: the idea that we have special, direct knowledge of our own minds. In other words, can you really, truly trust what's going on inside your own head? To make his case, Dennett gives us this great little thought experiment about two expert coffee tasters. We'll call them Chase and Sanborn. So after working in Maxwell House for years, they both come to the same conclusion. They just don't like the coffee anymore. The problem? They totally disagree on why. So Chase's theory is that the coffee hasn't changed, but his tastes have. He thinks he's become a more sophisticated coffee drinker. But Sanborn says, nope, I'm the same, my standards are the same, but my physical tasters must have changed, so the coffee just doesn't taste the way it used to. You see the problem? Same outcome, two completely different explanations for what's happening in their own minds. And here is Dennett's big gotcha moment. If these two experts can't even be sure whether their mind changed or their body changed, how can any of us claim to have this direct, perfect, infallible knowledge of our own experience? He's suggesting that these inner convictions we have might be a lot more unreliable than we think. But the defense comes back and says this is a classic bait and switch. They argue Dennett is confusing knowing the experience with knowing its cause. Who cares what the cause is? That's irrelevant. The really crucial point is that both Chase and Sanborn know with 100% certainty how the coffee tastes to them right now. And that immediate, undeniable feeling, well, that's the qualia. So, after all that back and forth, where do we land? Let's take a look at the final verdict from the paper and get into why this whole abstract debate actually matters. The bottom line from the source material is pretty clear. While Dennett's arguments and thought experiments are really clever,
they don't actually land a knockout punch. The paper argues that he just hasn't given us a good enough reason to throw out our fundamental common sense idea that we have these private, subjective experiences.
So the defense's position really holds its ground. Qualia can be seen as intrinsic to our own mental world. We do have direct private access to the way things seem to us, even if we don't know exactly why. And just because an experience is hard or even impossible to describe, well, that doesn't mean it isn't real. And that kind of brings it all back to you, doesn't it? Seriously, give it a try. Try to describe the experience of seeing the color red to someone who was born blind. You can't really do it without comparing it to other things like warmth or passion. It's almost impossible. Now, Dennett might say that proves it's not a real, definable thing. But for others, that indescribable private gap is exactly where qualia live. So what is that feeling, the one you can't put into words, say about the richness of your own inner world?